Hey, what's up, everybody? Just kind of thought I would pop in here real quick and go live because I had some thoughts. I had some thoughts that I wanted to get to regarding this kind of beef between Stephen A. and LeBron. I have to say, it definitely brought me back to my reporting days because those kind of beefs, believe it or not, uh, they're pretty well, I won't say they're pretty typical because I don't think that they're typical anymore, and that's actually a problem. And I'm going to get into that in a minute, and talk about how like sometimes these beefs, um, they can actually lead to a better understanding of things. So just waiting on a few more of y'all to kind of get in here and we'll chop it up. That's for sure. So if you're joining me right now, make sure that you let yourself be known in the chat. And if you have a question, um, please do feel free to ask because I'm just kicking it. This is just a random Tuesday, and I just decided like, hey, why not go live for a minute? And I hope this is also a this gives you all motivation to subscribe. So while you're here, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can see all of this content. What up, though, to all those who are joining? Appreciate you. Y'all streaming in now, so I appreciate that. Because it's definitely some things I'm gonna get into. So if you're in here right now, go tell a friend, invite their friends, and get with my friends, and we can all be friends. To quote from man, I guess it was Puffy that said that. Ooh, I don't know. Are we allowed to quote Puffy anymore? Like, is that done? But anyway, as the title of this discussion is called, I want to break down the media versus LeBron James, and by extension, Bronny James. Let's just start with the first of it, and that is, I'm sure a lot of you all have seen the video of Stephen A. being confronted by LeBron at a Lakers game courtside, right? And LeBron clearly was not happy with some of the commentary that Stephen A. Smith has said about his son, Bronny, who is now in the NBA, drafted 55th overall by the Lakers. And I've been on Stephen A.'s side of these conversations, or his side of the confrontation. I'm not co-signing what he said, but saying that I've been the reporter that has been confronted by an athlete, been confronted by coaches. So I know very much what that feeling is like. And so my immediate reaction when I saw that, I was good. And the reason why I said good is because of this. Now I'm coming at this from like a reporter mindset. All right. A career journalist who for at least half of my career, I was in and out of locker rooms, covering teams, leagues, players, all of those things. And the thing is, at some point you're gonna piss somebody off. At some point, you're gonna write something they don't agree with. And the whole value of having access to players or being in locker room environments and situations and covering teams is that it keeps you honest as a reporter. See, you write and talk about people differently when you have to face them eventually. And I found that out a few times for sure. And when I got to television, when I started regularly appearing on ESPN, and certainly when I got my own show, I had one simple rule that I knew I was going to live by. And I wanted to live by it too. And that rule was, don't say anything about a player that you would not say to their face. Like if I can't tell you that same criticism, like when we're in each other's face, then I don't need to say it on TV. And I think because I came from that kind of background where I was taught by the OGs in journalism and sports journalism that when you write some shit that an athlete or a coach might disagree with it, you got to go in the locker room the next day and be like, yeah, I'm here. And if you got a problem with it, let's talk about it. That used to be a regular part of the dynamics between journalists and athletes. And I thought it was a great dynamic. Of course, when I'm a young reporter, I was really intimidated by this. But as a young reporter, I thought this was great. Or as I matured in the business, let me backtrack. As I matured in the business, I thought this was a great dynamic because it kept both sides honest. I'm unlikely to say some reckless shit if I have to stand on it and stand on it in your face. And if I do say something that is critical and we have that conversation and you're able to express as the athlete or the coach why you didn't like something and you see me standing for it, it actually allows you to gain some respect for me. And so it works. That's a good dynamic that we have to have. But unfortunately, with the way things work now, a lot of teams, they try to severely limit access by journalists to players. And I get it, nobody loves facing the media, but it's a part of what the dynamic is. Is like the media, while it's not our job to promote the game, but the conversations, the things that we write, the things that we say wind up becoming they wind up generating conversation about the league. Right. And to some degree we serve an extension of the fans that want to know things. So like having us around, while again it may be a nuisance to some players, because some players embrace it, like they love being talked about. Okay. But while it may be some bit of a nuisance, it's also something that I think is healthy for both parties, if you get what I'm saying. Now, I'm not going to pretend I heard every single thing that Stephen A said about LeBron's son, about Bronny. But to me, it's very simple. As long as he keeps it to basketball, that's all. That's it. Like critiquing and judging Bronny as a basketball player is fair game. And that it doesn't matter if you say something positive, doesn't matter if you say something negative, whatever that is, critiquing him as a basketball player is fair. Now, from what I can glean, and certainly from how a lot of people have responded to this, the issue is, did Stephen A cross a line when it seemed like he was insinuating that LeBron was being a bad parent by putting, or at least I won't say a bad parent, I don't want to put 20 on 10, or was he critiquing his parenting by saying that it's LeBron's fault that Bronny is in this situation? And that's a really slippery slope, because you're coming at somebody who, by all intents and purposes, for what we know, is a great father. It's somebody that, he's raised like, 3 wonderful kids. They seem healthy, well-adjusted, given his level of fame. I mean, we don't know the ins and outs, at least those of us on the outside. We don't know the ins and outs of how LeBron parents, but I tell you, the team picture looks mighty damn good. And so I can understand why LeBron would take offense to that. And, LeBron, especially if you know his background, he's someone who, from what I understand, does not have a relationship with his father. And he's always talked openly about how Black fatherhood is very important to him. He's tried to put all of his children in the best possible situation, be it through his wealth, be it through opportunities. I mean, that's what he's done. That's what a father is supposed to do. And so I think LeBron had every right to defend his family, but Stephen A has a right to critique his son. And I know it can be tough if you're a father. Again, as long as he's keeping it to basketball, it can be tough as a father, it's tough for any parent. If in any situation you feel like your children are being hurt, I mean, it's your job as a parent to be a protector. I mean, as old as I am, my mama still refer to me as her baby. It's just what it is. Like that dynamic never goes away. And so I don't really have an issue with LeBron confronting Stephen A at all. And I'm sure Stephen A doesn't really have an issue with it either, because I'm going to guess this ain't the first time that Stephen A been confronted by an athlete about something that he said. And he's, mature enough in this business and a vet in this business to understand what that dynamic is like. And so, I think it's all right if that confrontation takes place, because there's a lot of players, and this as a journalist, there's a lot of players that aren't going to like you, and they're not going, and a lot of coaches too that won't like you and won't like what you have to say. And those players and coaches that we talk about in media spaces, they got families. And so, I'll tell you guys a funny story in a minute, or I don't know if it's funny, but I will certainly share about a few of these situations I've been to. And one did involve someone's son, but it just happened to be someone's son who's not famous. But real quick, because I invited you guys to comment, I want you all to let me know your thoughts. I'll post some of them on the screen and I'll respond to them. Like here's one from Snoop Y. that says, my only issue is Sass said that LeBron needed to stop Bronny and save him. That's not sports talk. That's questioning his parenting skills. Sass, wrong on that point. How is Sass going to school LeBron? As I just said, if it's something that is about his parenting and his approach, I think it's debatable about whether or not that's fair game, because you do get into a very tricky situation when you talk about how somebody is being raised. And as soon as you say that, you are inevitably making a critique about how that person parents. And you have to ask yourself, I'm not in their home. It is not my job to provide for them. Is this, is this my business to be sitting there and critiquing how they have chosen to raise their son or daughter? I think that's a fair question to definitely ask. So getting back to, sort of the story that I have. I remember I was a reporter. This is when I was covering Michigan State basketball. And so I'm with the team a lot, and just so you all that don't know this about how we cover teams, but when you cover in a team full time, that means you're going to practices, you going to games, you on the road, like you are spending a lot of time with this team. And sometimes you are with them more than you are your own family. Okay. And there was a player out of Michigan State named Marcus Taylor. And Marcus Taylor was considered to be, I think he won Mr. Basketball. He was definitely considered to be a top 5 player nationally, 5-star kind of guy. And he had a very involved father, Marcus Taylor Sr. And I had started sort of paying attention and covering Marcus a little bit in high school because everybody knew he was going to go to Michigan State. And so I developed a relationship with his father because I knew his father was a central figure, a key, the most important figure in his life. So it makes sense from just a journalistic standpoint for me to develop a good rapport with his father, which I did. And we had a really good rapport. I would quote him in stories, and Marcus was a good player. He struggled like all freshmen do when he got to college. But he generally, was pretty good. Now, the narrative on Marcus was that when Marcus, a lot of people thought Marcus would be able to leave and go pro early because they thought that much of his basketball ability. Now, I ain't saying I know everything about basketball, but I know enough. And based on what I frankly saw of Marcus, I just thought it would have been hard for him to make the leap when a lot of people expected him to make the leap to the NBA. Him and Zach Randolph, Ozebo, they played together on the same Michigan State team. Everybody knew after Zach's freshman year, that was going to be his last year at Michigan State because that dude had elite level post moves since he was born. And you could see how his skills were going to translate in the NBA. It was a little bit more difficult when it came to Marcus. So I said, you know what? Rather than me just put my opinion on it, let me go out here and talk to some NBA scouts. And that's what I did. Now, the scouts, of course, now when you talk to scouts never want their names used. Like they do not, because they're scouting for a team. A lot of them eventually want to get jobs, moving up the ladder. So it was like, okay, talk to some scouts. I asked them about Marcus's ability as a pro. They all said the same thing. He's a 3-4 year player at best. Didn't feel like he had the NBA quickness. Thought his handles were good shooter, high basketball IQ, but they didn't know if that was enough to where his skills will really translate to him being a franchise top player in the next level. So that's what I wrote because that's what they said. His father was mad as hell at me. That article got published. His father hot. And he went off on me. And he was like, how dare you question my son and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And the line that got me, which was interesting, he said, I treated you like a daughter. And I'm like, excuse me, sir? We are not family. And I've never given you any indication that this is, this is, while we were friendly and we had a rapport. But sometimes, even within that, people kind of get it twisted and start to think that because we have a good relationship, that means that I'm not going to write the truth. It's my job to write the truth. The truth is what those scouts said. His father never talked to me after that. It was a wrap. Now, Marcus, he went pro. It was not a good decision. So at the end of the day, I was right. Okay. Or the scouts were right. Because again, it wasn't coming from my mouth, but that's the type of thing that is a regular part of being a sports journalist. It's like sometimes you're going to piss people off. All right, here's another question I'm gonna take from y'all. This is from Cine Thumper. I don't even know if I'm saying this right. Do you think having LeBron's hand in Bronny's career and the moves he made to get him to the Lakers is a good thing for Bronny? You know, my position on this was always I don't care. And the reason why I don't care is because we're talking about somebody who was drafted 55th. All right. If you look at the history of second round picks in the NBA, it's not a great history. Most of the time that when you decide to make a pick in the second round, generally speaking, not saying all the time, generally speaking, it is you're taking a chance. And sometimes the people that are drafted, it could be because they know a coach. It could be a variety of ways that would be considered to boiling down to a hookup. It's not always they taking the best player that's available at that position. It's kind of like sometimes with backup quarterbacks in the NFL. A lot of backup quarterbacks are actually not the best in terms of talent. Like they're not the dude that, you know, if there's a drop off and the main guy gets injured and they have to go to somebody else, they wasn't the most talented dude out there. Sometimes it's just because they know the system. Sometimes it's because they know that coach. They have like other things that are at play. So generally speaking, after the obvious guys, there is some level of, you know, sort of outside forces that lead to that decision. And so I didn't mind. I didn't really mind that the Lakers, you know what I compared it to? I'm going to tell y'all what I compared it to. Right or wrong? Listen, I know a lot of people may not agree. Remember Kobe Bryant before, you know, I think it was his last contract with the Lakers. And y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. But he got a hell of a deal. His last contract, you know, with the Lakers. And given where he was in his career, it was obvious that his championship days were behind him. It was obvious the days of him being the best player in the league were behind him. But they gave him that deal because that was called you are our superstar. And we know even if you are not the player you once were, and even we don't have a chance of winning a championship, then this is to us adequate payment for services rendered. He's their main star. The Lakers have a part of the reason so many players want to be Lakers is because the organization has a very good reputation for treating the players a certain way. And that was part of that treatment. So let's just say that the Lakers, when it came to Bronny, they drafted him because of LeBron. All right. He's their star. He's their best player. He's somebody who may eventually have a statue outside of Staples, crypto, whatever you want to call it. Who cares? I'm being dead serious. Like, who cares? You know, it's like, yeah, they're supposed to take care of their franchise superstar player. That's how it works all across the NBA. You think Giannis's brothers are in the NBA because they're so good? Because I noticed that nobody want to have this conversation about nepotism with them. You know, I'm like, yeah, why do you think Milwaukee put them on the roster? It's because they want to keep their best player happy. As a franchise, that's what you do. I mean, yes, you want to win championships, but you also got tickets to sell. And that's the other thing people don't talk about. Look, coming out of college, and I know his college career was shortened and wasn't probably what it could have been for a number of different reasons. But these days, when you think about the college players that are coming out, there's not a lot of stars coming out. There's not when I say stars, I mean people who are instantly recognizable. We have one that's potentially coming out from Duke, Cooper Flagg. Been talking about this kid for years. Cooper Flagg is going to immediately come into the NBA with name recognition. All right. LeBron's son, Bronny, was one of those players. He is one of the highest paid NIL athletes, one of the highest paid, right? Why? Because he has name recognition. You know how many people have bought Bronny's jersey as an NBA professional? And I know we as sports fans or sports fans out there like to live in this dream that everything is always about merit and it's about tickets and it's about championships and all that. No, sometimes they are literally making business decisions all the time. See, because the Lakers are in a different situation than a lot of other NBA teams. Notice the NBA ownership, like Steve Ballmer is worth like $200 billion, something insane. Okay. The Clippers are his toy. They are not his main business. All right. The team or the group that bought the Dallas Mavericks from Mark Cuban, the Mavericks are not their main business. All right. This is a family. This is the Waltons. They worth a ton of money. Okay. The Lakers are unique in their ownership dynamic because the Lakers are their main business. So they have to approach situations a lot differently than some of the other ownership groups. It's a family business. And it's not a lot of family businesses that operate and are run like the Lakers. So, yes, sometimes they're going to have to make business decisions, however unpopular, if that's the context in which you choose, to see this. And I know sometimes it interrupts the fantasy of like how we think about sports or how we want sports to be, but it is the truth. And so for them, I don't think it was just about, developing the potential of of a player. That was a component of it. It was also about maintaining the business that they have with LeBron James. And it was about the fact that they were buying into a player that they not only thought had potential, but from a business standpoint was going to be a lot more valuable than anybody that they could have picked 55th. It's what it is. so um so yeah, I mean, I very much understand, why he was drafted. And I know people get bothered by the nepotism because I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat about, oh, nepotism, and about whether or not that's good in sports. That's a tricky thing to answer because I mean, where it's bad is like we see sometimes how that nepotism, runs very deep when it comes to football, the NFL in particular. I mean, USA Today did this huge story some years ago, where they talked about the number of coaches who were related to other coaches, either family relation or by marriage, and it was an enormous number. I hesitate to say what that number was, but because of that layer of nepotism, the story was just generally about how that impacts the ability of Black and brown and minority coaches to get opportunities because they always going up against somebody, brother or cousin. And so, I definitely understand why people kind of just generally react negatively to nepotism. I also understand why Black folks are like, we never get the benefit of nepotism. And if this is nepotism, so be it. I get it. But at the same time, I think there was entirely too much, like the way some people acted about the Lakers picking Bronny at this spot was like, by them picking him, they was going to miss out on SGA. It was like, what? It's like the majority of second round picks do not work out. They're always flyers. So if it doesn't work out, it would just put him in the trove of players that don't work out. So I didn't really see any huge harm in them doing that. And let me just, real quickly get back to something else about another point that I've seen raised by people is why is the media spending so much time talking about Bronny James? Like, y'all don't talk about any other 55th pick ever. Well, yeah, you're right. We don't. Are the other 55th picks the son of possibly the greatest player in NBA history? They're not. I know this is a new to some people. Famous people get talked about more. I know that's like a news flash to some people, but I'm like, yeah, he's famous. He was famous coming out of high school. He was famous since he was born because he was LeBron's son. So yeah, he's gonna get talked about more than other second round picks. And yeah, as a second round pick, he gonna get talked about more than first round picks because it gets back to what I said earlier, is that a lot of these picks coming out of college and some that are coming from overseas, people, American audiences do not know. And Wemby is an exception. Wemby is he was on the radar for a while. And given the novelty of his skill set, I think Wemby was going to automatically, get a boost in American audiences. But yeah, they're talking about Bronny because he's famous. Like, it makes sense. But to that same point, within that, I think, um, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And so when you are the son of LeBron James, you are going to be critiqued and scrutinized much differently than other people. And especially given that you have chosen to follow, you may not be the same player, but you've chosen to follow the path of somebody who many consider to be the greatest basketball player of all time. And so, yeah, like that's a big responsibility. There's not a lot of people who can handle it. I have a feeling he's probably especially equipped to handle it just because he's had to live with it for so long. But this is kind of what happens, if you will. But anyway, I want to tell y'all a quick, not too quick of a story, but a quick enough story about, and probably the best athlete, um, uh, I guess, confrontation I've ever had. All right. Best athlete confrontation I've ever had. This was when I was at ESPN. I was doing his and hers. So this would have been maybe 2014, 2015, somewhere in that window. And we were having a discussion on air, me and my co-host and friend, Michael Smith. We were having a discussion on air about Kobe Bryant. Now, the reason we were talking about Kobe is because at this time, I believe one of the major magazines had done a huge magazine spread on him. I think y'all remember it because he kind of got clowned a little bit over the internet because he was wearing like a Zorro looking hat and he was in like an all white. I don't remember who did the piece on him. So, this is big piece on Kobe Bryant. And one of the things they asked Kobe about was Trayvon Martin. And Kobe's comments about Trayvon Martin's situation. Trayvon Martin, of course, being the teenager who was murdered in Florida. And Kobe's comments I thought were a little tone deaf. In fact, I thought they were a lot of tone deaf. And so I said that on air. And because I think he said something along the lines of just because Trayvon Martin was Black, he shouldn't be expected to have to, sort of stand up for Trayvon, or that, just because somebody was Black and, it wasn't just, you could tell that Kobe was very much channeling the experiences that he had been through in the court system. So he was coming from the perspective of he wasn't going to automatically assume the guilt of George Zimmerman. And, again, I had my own feelings and thoughts about Trayvon Martin and him being murdered. And I'm using the word murdered on purpose. And so I criticized Kobe for what he said. Now, before I could get off air, and sometime in the commercial break, I got 2 emails from Kobe's reps, different reps. And they both said, Kobe wants to talk to you right away. Kobe wants to talk to you right away. And I said, all right, wait till I get off air and we could talk. I had a feeling he probably didn't like what I had to say. So then, we go to the next break doing the show and I look, and Kobe has sent me a direct message. I think it was on Twitter. He said, hey, when you get a second, call me. I'm at this number. I'm like, oh my gosh. I have never had a conversation with Kobe Bryant in my life. I think the extent of our interaction is, I feel like I'm pretty sure I covered the Western Conference Finals. I think they're playing the Suns. I feel like it was the Suns. I covered that series. That was the extent of me talking to Kobe Bryant in a scrum full of reporters. So I hit him back with a DM. I said, I'll do it as soon as I get off air. End of the show comes. We off air. And I'm on my way home. And that's when I called Kobe. And, I said, hey, you wanted to talk to me. What's this about? And he then, told me that like he thought what I said about him was unfair. I didn't understand his perspective, and I was like, okay, well, if, what did I miss? And basically what he said was exactly what he said in that article. And I was like, no, I heard you fine. I just disagree. And here's why. And so I said my piece. He said some more back. I said, when he explained some other things, I said, I can see how you got there. I still disagree, but I can kind of see how you got there. But I still don't mind. I still don't what I said. Because remember what I said, my golden rule is if I can't say it to your face, I don't need to be saying it. And so then we go back and forth. And I said, you know what, Kobe, I told him, I said, I enjoyed this conversation because this is how it used to work in our business. By that time I'm on TV, I'm not going to the locker rooms and covering teams and with players on a regular basis. And I said, I enjoyed this because this is how it was when I was coming up in the business. You pissed somebody off, y'all talked it out, everybody went about their way. Sometimes they didn't always see your side of it, or you didn't see theirs. And sometimes the relationship was just over and it was what it was. And so, I told him that, and he said, that was, he thought it was cool too. And he understood my perspective. And naturally, of course, I invited him on the show. I was like, but we can talk about it on ESPN if you want. He was like, no, don't want to talk about it. And I said, all right, I got you. And, he said, but keep this number. And if something comes up where you have a question about something that I've said, or, something you want to discuss, use this number. And I was like, all right, I really appreciated that. And fast forward, I hit Kobe up. The next time I hit him up was to do, and you guys, I think it's on YouTube, you might be able to see it, was to ask him if he was interested in doing a one-on-one with me for BET during their BET Awards weekend. They had this developmental series called Genius Talks, where you talk to people who are the masters at their crafts about how they do what they do, and so on and so forth. And I took a flyer and I asked, because BET had asked me, to do this, and they had some other athletes they threw around, and I don't know what gave me the idea, but I said, I think Kobe will do this. And so I hit Kobe up and I said, hey, said if I ever needed something to call you, I got a proposition for you. And I told Kobe, hey, would you be interested in doing this event with me? And he said, yep, it's done. Didn't take any convincing. I was like, oh, okay, sure. And we had that one-on-one conversation. It was great. Got to know him. And I remember he clowned me because I had never seen Finding Nemo. And I remember he said to me then, because I think he had not retired. I think what was coming up was his last year. And he said, I joked with him and I said, Kobe, you going to be one of them dudes that's going to be real unhappy in retirement, because I can't see something else giving you what basketball is giving you in terms of, what you might pursue professionally when this is done. And he laughed and he was like, I promise you, he's like, I'm not going to be one of those dudes hanging around the game. I have other things that I want to do. And he started talking about animation and about how he was really into it. And he thought that animation was the present and the future and that kind of thing. And we had a, kind of a good talk about that. He's like, I want to tell stories. And I was like, all right, if I had $1 for every time I heard athletes say that, like, I'd be rich. Okay. And sure enough, fast forward, that man won an Oscar for an animated project for Dear Basketball. And I was like, that's what my dumb ass get for doubting that man. But the point being, and telling you that long-winded story, is that, sometimes from disagreement, like something better can kind of come along. And, maybe for Stephen A. and LeBron, this is just a season. And when LeBron's no longer playing and Bronny is no longer the hot topic of conversation, perhaps, they can have a real conversation about it, and not just one where it's at a basketball game or, Stephen A. taking to his platform to kind of address the things that were said. But confrontation isn't, unfortunately or fortunately, I think it's actually good. It's a part of our business. It's what it is. And so, I in a way, as I said, like what I sort of weirdly enjoyed about seeing the confrontation is like, it reminded me that that's how it's supposed to work. And probably a big problem that we have in media today is that when you're allowed to say anything, and you are allowed to say anything, but when you're allowed to say anything without sort of consequences or repercussions or having to face somebody, um, it naturally inspires you to maybe say things you would not have said. Or the other part is that it doesn't make you as strong of a journalist as you could be, because you aren't put in a position to have to defend what you said to that person directly. Another funny story I remember, um, about, sort of that same principle is, I remember I used to be, when Johnny Manziel was, all the flavor and all the news. I mean, I thought he was a hell of a player. I mean, and I knew he was gonna win the Heisman when he won it. I was like, oh no, that dude gonna win the Heisman. I mean, just about the way he played. But it was a lot of extra that came with Johnny Manziel. And I just said, listen, I enjoy this as much as everybody, and it's cool, but do realize there's gonna be another side to that. And when somebody do that on you, or when they stop you, like on the field, that's gonna show up. All right. I used to call him Captain Doing Too Much all the time. And so it was partly in jest and partly because I know sometimes a lot of players who do certain gestures and things, often they can't take it when it's done to them. I'm like, so be sure that you can take it when you on the other side of it, right? And I was at the ESPY's after party, maybe like a year or two later. And I saw Johnny Manziel at this after party. And Mike, my co-host, like he loved Johnny Manziel. We used to joke, and I used to joke about it on air. I'm like, Johnny Manziel is that other child. You just not claiming him on your taxes. Like, you love this man like he your son, And I used to mess with him about that quite a bit. So when we saw Johnny, Mike was making fun of me. Oh no, actually he wasn't with me that night. I was with some other friends of mine. But I remember telling him about it when we got back to work. And so ran into Johnny Manziel, and he made a reference, like he knew, like I've been sort of talking shit about him. And I was like, yeah, I said it. I was like, listen, I was like, I'm an old head, I'm an old soul. It's like I enjoy the gesture, but I was like, you out there now. You put yourself out there in a way that it's gonna be some backlash and some clapback. And to some degree, when you have those games where you don't perform as we're used to seeing you perform, the first thing that's gonna be thrown up in your face is the money side. And so everything I said on air, I said directly to Johnny Manziel's face. And we was good. Like, he had no issue with it. I had no issue with him bringing it up to me. No problem whatsoever. And again, that's the way that theoretically you want it to work. I'm gonna take a couple more comments so I can get out of here, because you guys have had a lot to say about this issue. This is from Doc Spank and the Funky Toys. Is that a band? Just curious. Why are we short playing the as a father remark? That's the entire island. All of the rest of this chit chat about journalism and athletes is nonsense. Well, I would disagree that it was nonsense, but what I would say is that's why I made sure to clarify. I haven't heard every single thing that Stephen A. Smith had to say about Bronny, but if in any way, I think that is partly why it seems like what motivated LeBron to confront him is by him saying, or him feeling like this wasn't just basketball criticism, but this was criticism that went into the sensitive area about how he parents. And any parent is going to take offense to that, especially if they like, you ain't raising them, I am. Y'all already know. All of us got mamas and daddies, and we already know what kind of smoke somebody would get if they question how any of our parents were parenting somebody. It is a trickier situation because you're talking about somebody who is like, if Bronny were an engineer, we wouldn't be having this discussion, right? But unfortunately, he is in the sport of basketball, which his, father has, obviously has established himself as one of the greatest, players in history. Um, Here's another one from I'm Pooh Not Shiesty. All right, that's creative. Sass called LeBron soft for calling him uh, on his YouTube show as well. Did he? I would know if he did, but I don't know. Did he call him soft though? Or are you putting a little bit too much on it? Because I feel like if Stephen A said LeBron James is soft, I might have saw that headline more than a few places. Now maybe he backed up his position, but I don't know that he would go that far as to do something like that. I mean, Stephen A ain't crazy. All right. And that just, I think generally, that's one of them trigger words that you should be careful to avoid, with athletes is calling them soft. Because even if you think that them playing the sport they're playing and haven't made it to a professional level, that ain't nothing soft about that. So yeah. All right, taking one more here. All right, peas and balls. Peas and balls. I probably am reading this really ridiculously. Okay, a journalist develops some type of relationship with a player in the process of covering the player. I can imagine it can be difficult to balance that relationship and report from your perspective. You're right, it is. I covered Michigan State football and basketball for 6 years, and after I did it for 6 years, I wanted off the beat because at some point you start to get too familiar, and um and it'll compromise your reporting. And speaking of Stephen A. Smith, this is something that he has talked about before, about why he stopped covering Allen Iverson and why he stopped discussing Allen Iverson. He covered Allen Iverson for a huge chunk of his time as an NBA beat writer, and they developed a good relationship. And at some point, that begins to get compromised, and you have to be able to kind of establish, like, yeah, I may like you and you cool, but I got a job to do. Because at the end of the day, you have your own professional credibility to worry about. You got bills to pay too. And so looking out for athletes can really put you in a bad spot. And I always told players and coaches that I covered that I won't be favorable, but I'll be fair. That's all. I mean, and I think that's really all that one should really ask for and require. Fairness is what we're talking about here. Not favorable, fairness. That means you go out there and commit a crime, I'm gonna have to say you commit a crime. But if I, from knowing your backstory and knowing certain things, I'm able to give context to why you did something. That to me is the fairness, or making sure that how you're reported on is how I would report on anybody else, and that there's no double standards being applied there. I mean, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be reported on the same, only from the standpoint of everybody ain't the same, ain't the same in terms of being a good player. Everybody ain't the same in terms of what their status is. But I'm going to do my job. And I think that's all, that's really the highest standard that we should hold ourselves to, is just being fair. Listen, I want to thank y'all for doing this quick live with me and dropping by and making some comments. I just kind of did a spur of the moment. I'll be doing more of these now. But do me a favor while y'all are here, while we chit-chatting, while we kikiing. I know men don't kiki, so I'm sorry. That didn't apply. That didn't apply to the men folks in there. I apologize. While we chopping it up, is that better? Why don't y'all hit that subscribe button? That would be great. You could check out not only some more of these lives, but also some of the other content that I have. Politics is the name of my podcast. It comes out every Thursday on iHeart or wherever you get your podcast. It's about sports and the intersection with culture, race, gender, and yes, politics. So it's built for conversations, like these, about what's your role and responsibility as a reporter as it relates to things like that. So I appreciate y'all hopping in here. Really would appreciate y'all hitting that subscribe button, and I will see y'all sooner rather than later. Peace.